Hello everybody! It's only taken a month, but I'm finally here at the last part of my A to Z readathon wrap-up of the 25 books I read for that readathon in November. These are the last 5, which are the letters V through Z. For V, I read Vallista by Brust, which is the 15th and latest book published in the Vlad Tolstos fantasy series. I also read the previous book, Hawk, for the readathon, and I've talked about both of these in their own video where I talk about what they're about and about the series overall, so I'll refer you to that if you want more details. Since I filmed that video, it's been pointed out to me that when you're reading these in publication order, they come in a specific pattern. You have a current book and then a past book. You have a book that's set in the present day, and then it will go back in the next one to talk about something that happened in the past. So Hawk was a present day book. Vallista, coming right after it, is set in the past, just shortly before Hawk, I think. So I was a bit disappointed that it didn't carry on the events of Hawk immediately, but obviously there's a pattern that explains why. It was very funny though. I don't think it's the strongest in the series, but I got the humor and I really enjoyed it because of that. For W, I was supposed to read Wolf Moon by Ian McDonald, which is still on my list to read in the last couple days of 2017. We'll see if I can make that happen. But I was running out of time, so I actually switched to a book that I really wanted to read because I knew it would be fun, and that is Women in Sports, written and illustrated by Rachel Ignotofsky. Now, I don't have that book to show you because I got it from the library, but I do own a copy of Ignotofsky's first book, Women in Science, which is the same style. It looks very, very similar with the cover, and the artwork style inside is the same and everything. It has the same format. So Women in Sports highlights 50 women and their particular contributions to athletics, the things that they accomplished, the first women to do X, Y, Z, and then women who are particularly lauded or been awarded a lot of things and stuff like that. Now, obviously, Women in Science speaks to my interests in a way that athletics does not. I care nothing about sports and athletes, though I occasionally watch gymnastics whenever the Olympics rolls around, but that's about it. So it was surprising at first to me that I actually recognized a large number of the female athletes in this book, but obviously that makes sense because sports is deeply ingrained in popular culture and I'll see it in the news all the time, whereas female scientists, unless they win a Nobel Prize, which is rare, you're not going to hear about them as much. But I ended up enjoying Women in Sports just as much as Women in Science. Even though I thought I wouldn't be as interested in the topic, I actually was, because it's the same format and it's that same almost like inspirational message. That's what I love about both of these books that Ignotofsky has done so far, is she doesn't dwell on the negatives, and honestly there are a lot of negatives because it's the first 50 women in X field to overcome all the barriers put in their way, and that can get pretty heavy after a while, but Ignotofsky brings so much charm and joy and focusing on the positivity of these women's achievements. So I came away from this feeling just as happy and uplifted, I guess would be the good word, as I had when I read Women in Science. I'm not as inspired to go off and read more about these women like I was about female scientists because I already know a lot about them. Information about them is much more readily available, but I did go off and watched a lot of sports highlights featuring women on YouTube, which that would be a first for me. For X, I chose a very obvious book, which is X by Sue Grafton. It's the 24th book in her alphabetical mystery detective series featuring Kinsey Milhone, and I've never read or been familiarized with the first 23 books in the series. I just needed a book for X, one that sounded like it wouldn't be a complete trash fire. So listening to this on audiobook, it was fine. I think the whole thing was completely average. Kinsey Milhone is a female detective, like a private eye, running around California, I think, in the 1980s. This is the bit that I didn't know about. The series I thought was set in the modern day, like keeping pace with the modern day, but it's actually all set in the 1980s, which is kind of like watching a television series set in the 1980s when you realize people can't just pick up cell phones and call each other when you think they're going to, which is frustrating, but also kind of a better setup for mystery novels, honestly. So in this one, there are two kind of investigations. Kinsey is asked by a mysterious woman to make contact with her son that she'd given up for adoption. Kinsey does find him, and then when she's paid, the police show up and say, oh yeah, you were paid with marked bills, and this woman doesn't really exist, and this house you went to really isn't hers, and Kinsey wants to know how she got swindled out of $200, you know? The second thing is that a man that Kinsey had known and worked with in the past has died. He's been killed, I think. She hadn't really liked him as a person, but she's friends with his widow and does a favor for her because the IRS has been sniffing around asking for tax returns and stuff, which the widow can't find or doesn't understand. And that actually leads Kinsey down a road to this man's last investigation involving women and their addresses and how they're connected, and puts her in the line of fire of a very dangerous man who may have killed his previous wife and might be about to do it again or something. I didn't think that either of these investigations was particularly interesting. They felt a little bit too drawn out, and I kept waiting for them to come together at some point. Like, what is the connection between these two? Except I don't really think there was a connection at any point. So it felt a little bit long and drawn out, like I had two investigations that were mostly padding for a story that never really materialized that I expected. It was a bit odd. So on the whole, it was enough to keep me paying attention while I was listening to it on audiobook, but I thought it was average. Reading a lot of the reviews on Goodreads though, it seems like the dedicated fans of this series, the ones who have read all 24 up to that point for over like 3 decades or whatever, don't think it's the best in the series either. A lot of people seem to think that the earlier books are really great. So while I didn't love X, I think it would be worth my while to go back and read at least A is for Alibi or something and see where it all started and what people love so much about the earlier books. For Y, I read You Have Never Been Here by Mary Ricket, which is a collection of Ricket's short stories. This was a disappointing read, especially because I had already read 3 or 4 of the stories in the collection and my memories of them were quite positive. And I basically hated, disliked, or was incredibly bored by all of the stories at one point or another, except for one, which is called Cold Fires. I had originally read it when it was reprinted on Tor.com and I really liked it, and I really liked it the second time I was reading it. I think Ricket has the same style as Kelly Link. I keep mentioning Kelly Link as an example of short story style stuff I really don't like. I'm sorry if you're a Kelly Link fan, I don't get along with that slipstream type thing. Ricket was very much like that, lots of bizarre, surreal, strange stuff going on, and it all felt disjointed and disconnected and it didn't make any sense. The big disappointment in this one for me was The Mothers of Vorhisville, which is a novelette or a novella. It's the longest piece in the book, which I think was nominated for a World Fantasy Award or a Nebula Award at one point, and I really wanted to read it. It was very highly praised. I was so bored, I skim read large portions of it, which is something I usually don't like to do, but yeah, I didn't get along with it. Some of the stories would have this nugget, like just an image or a little idea that I would go, wow, I really like that, but I hate the way it's executed. It's just a different type of storytelling that I don't appreciate very much, that doesn't feel as satisfying to me, unfortunately. But hey, I read it. I finally read something by Mary Ricket. And the last book for Z, I read Zodiac by Neal Stephenson. Zodiac is an environmental activist thriller set in the 1980s or 1990s. It's basically contemporary to when Stephenson wrote it, which is interesting. This is, I think, his second book he ever published, and it's like reading baby Stephenson. The fact that it is under 400 pages is like, oh my god, just wow, I didn't know he had it in him. And it isn't quite the same style, it isn't as info dumpy, and it's also contemporary basically, which is, as far as I know, unlike any of his other books, which are either science fiction set in a different time or historical fiction set in like the 1600s or something. So what this is about, this just has a kooky setup to it. It's a lot of fun. Sangamon Taylor is the head. He's like basically the chief jackass hired at this organization that is taking down corporations for polluting the environment. They're basically radical environmentalists, but they're being paid for it. And he is literally hired because he's a great jerk and he can irritate corporations. And he believes very strongly about not polluting the environment. They do things like going out on their Zodiac boats on water in the deep of night and plugging up polluting pipes running from corporations into rivers with concrete, which is actually quite exciting to read. Sangamon goes out one day on the Boston Harbor and detects something that's massively polluting the water. It is off the charts, and he wants to trace it back to this particular corporation that he has in his sights that he wants to take down. And they're on to him. Somebody's trying to kill him as well. It's just crazy. It's crazy and it's quite funny. It never lets up. There's always something happening. It's just action all the time. I've forgotten some of it because I read it a month ago, but it was just really compelling to read. And I actually never read an environmental book quite like this about, you know, activists on the front line going and doing kind of possibly shady illegal things to get in the face of corporations and stuff. It was very interesting. I do have one caveat about this though, which is either the main character, Sangamon, was really irritating or he was a little bit prejudiced. I think he's supposed to be a jerk, you know, but he has some redeeming qualities, but he grated on me a little bit. And there are some kind of throwaway lines, some things that he says about like immigrants and things like that, where you get the feeling that he just sort of accepts stereotypes and tropes about people and will spit them out when he wants to, when he's being lazy, basically. He'll work with stereotypes if they help him, but he's actually intelligent enough and caring enough as a human being to see past them, to see past like casual prejudices and stuff, but he doesn't. At the beginning of the book, it kept taking me aback. He would say certain things and I'm like, wow, you've just proven that you actually probably aren't that type of person, but you're like purposefully being a jackass, which makes you sound like you actually are a bit of a racist or something. It was strange, and I didn't highlight enough examples to go back and analyze it again or whatever, but you know, overall the book was really fun. It was completely unlike my favorite books by Stephenson so far. So, you know, if you want something that's more accessible than his 800-page tomes, have a thrilling environmental story. So yeah, thank you for sticking with me through this very much interrupted wrap-up. It's taken a whole month. December was a trip, guys, but I've got it done. So let me know if you've read any of these books, if you have any thoughts about them, or you have any recommendations for me based off of what I liked, and I will talk to you again very soon. And until then, bye.